Our next guest is a global best-selling author with more than 300 million copies of his book sold across the world.
Here to talk about his new book. It is Endgame. It's the final instalment of the William Warwick series. Please welcome Jeffrey Archer. Good morning to you, Jeffrey. We wanted to talk to you about the book, but I'm more interested in talking to you about golf. Oh, no, he's gone. Oh, we think we've got you.
I was up last night, and what a remarkable putt that was. Think of the pressure on you to have the whole of the Ryder Cup resting on your shoulders. Wow, well played, Mr. Lowry. Well played, sir.
Well, this book is all about the London Olympics.
Yeah.
So what potentially went wrong behind the scenes? Maybe that's the next one. That's the next book, Jeffrey. What could have gone wrong behind the Ryder Cup?
No, what went wrong with the Olympics? I decided the eighth book, the last book in the William Warwick series, would be about the Olympics, because William would then be a commander, and would he become commissioner? So I flew over to Monaco to see Seb Coe and said, what went wrong that the public never found out about? And he didn't know. I mean, he told me a tiny thing that he dealt with, but he said I had to go and see Commander Bob Broadhurst, who was head of security for the Olympic Games. So I came back to London and saw the commander, thinking he wouldn't tell me anything, but 14 years on, he felt he could. And he told me 14 things that went wrong, 2 of them which would have closed the games. And I wrote 7 of my own. So there are 21 things that went wrong in the Olympics, but 14 of them are true. You have to decide which.
See, this is the truth that you have put into these novels. And this is, like, people who read them will know William Warwick. Also at play with Endgame there is an international plot, of course. And in this, you have got a Russian and Chinese plot coming into play in relation to the London Olympic Games in 2012. Have people said to you, we know they were a massive success. Like, we know it all worked. What's the point in writing a book like this?
Well, the outside world in 2012, you are right, thought the Olympics was the height of Britain's success in a way. It was a magnificent achievement for Sebastian Coe and his team. But the truth is, the opening ceremony was within 12 minutes of being closed, and the stadium could have been in darkness for 4 hours had it not been for Commander Broadhurst or William Warwick.
Wow.
You've
sold it. Listen, Jeffrey, we have to talk to you about, like, you're still another book. I believe there's still plans for another book after this one. Over 300 million books sold, but you're famous for your work ethic. Even at, I think, as at 85 years of age, you still put incredible effort and work behind each and every one of your books. What's your daily schedule?
I tell young people who come to see me, there is no shortcut to writing a novel. It's damned hard work. I was once speaking in Dublin at your wonderful Trinity, and a young man came up and said, "You've ruined my weekend, Jeffrey." And I said, "I beg your pardon." "You've ruined my life." I said, "I beg your pardon." He said, "I was going to write the great Irish novel this weekend." And I thought, no. I explained to him that I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I work 6 to 8, 10 to 12, 2 to 4, 6 to 8, in bed at 9:30, 10, up again at 5:30. First draft, 300 hours, 6 weeks. And the book you have in front of you is the 17th draft. I wish it got easier, but it doesn't.
17th draft of a book, and it's because it's fascinating the amount of books that you have. I think everyone in the, certainly when I was growing up, and still now, you walk into a house and everyone has Cain and Abel. There's a copy of that in most people's houses.
Well, why? And I'll tell you why, or one of the reasons. First, you're quite right, it's on its 142nd reprint, but I owe so much to Gay Byrne. It was almost the first show I did when Cain and Abel came out, and I was unknown, and Gay Byrne had read it and put me on the show. and told the world that it was going to be the book of the year. But much more important, he rang his friend Johnny Carson and told him. So when I went to America, I had 4 minutes, long time in television, as you both know, 4 minutes on the Johnny Carson show, and it went straight to #1. So I owe a great deal to Gay Byrne.
What was your relationship with him like?
Well, I found him a total professional. And the fact that he could speak to half of Ireland in one evening was always incredible. And I was very touched when the government asked him to do a major job, which you all know about, a major role in the political world. He asked to see me and came for advice and said, what's it like to take on something like this? And of course, it was a challenge, which he much enjoyed, and I've been told made a great success of.
Yeah, with the Road Safety Authority, when he decided to kind of bridge that gap between what he did and getting involved in a government body, and we all, like, you know, it's amazing the power that Gay Byrne had. As you mentioned, he knew influential figures all over the world, and he could pick up this phone. But also someone else that you met that enjoyed, because your first book was Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, and that was rejected about 14 times. Next thing, your second book is Cain and Abel, and it goes stratospheric, so much so that Frank Sinatra loved your book.
Well, that was weird. I'm a huge Sinatra fan, and the American ambassador very kindly invited me to go to the residence in London with my wife. My wife sat next to Mr. Sinatra, so Mary got 2 hours with him. I had a time with him, and as we were having our photograph taken together, he did say, "I go on tour a lot, Geoffrey." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "I'm stuck in rooms on my own for a lot." "Yes." And he said, "I love Cain and Abel. It took away hours."
That's an amazing thing to have going on in your life. Obviously, you're a prolific writer. You were also a Conservative politician, very close with Margaret Thatcher and people of the day. But when you look at the UK now, obviously we see the rise of reform. Labour, when they came into government last year, they had said that this was going to be it was going to be a very difficult time for them. But now we see the difficulties. We see the taxes that are being implemented, the fact that there is no money. They're trying to sort out the economy. There does seem to be a schism in what's going on in the old political parties and with the rise of reform. What do you make of it, Geoffrey?
I think it's almost impossible to govern nowadays for the very simple reason we are no longer convenient. We no longer retire at 65, collect a gold watch and die at 70. In Japan, there are 80,000 people over the age of 100. The problem for any government is how you handle everybody between the age of 70 and 100, give them enough money to live on and still are not bankrupt. I tell you who saw it coming. Margaret Thatcher saw it coming. She wrote a paper on it 30 years ago saying insurance and tax provisions for the old will be the biggest problem of all.
You had a great relationship with her. You worked obviously alongside her, had a personal relationship as well with Margaret Thatcher. What was she like?
It was a great honour to have worked with her for 11 years and then remain a friend. Part of that friendship was due to the fact that my wife Mary was a chemist. Margaret read chemistry at Somerville. Mary was at Somerville. So the combination of my love of politics and her love of science did mean we had an unusual relationship, which I treasure now. And I must say, to answer your question, I took for granted at the time. Now at the age of 85, when I see what's going on all around me, I took Margaret Thatcher for granted, and I shouldn't have done.
When you look at political discourse in the world, when you look at social media, when you look at politicians that are coming through, what do you make of it? There's an awful lot of talk here from politicians themselves, from our Ceann Comhairle in charge of our Dáil, saying we need to do something about what's happening in the world with social media and the attacks that are happening. What do you make of that in comparison to your time in politics?
Oh, when I was a young member of Parliament, I used to get 12 letters a week. I replied to every one of them by hand, and they were kind and polite, asking questions. Members of Parliament now get 100 emails a day, which I'm told 90% of them are just damn right rude. So yes, you're quite right. It has changed completely. And I'm not sure I could cope with that. I was a very happy young member of Parliament. And I feel it's not in any country, it's not the easiest profession to take up.
Absolutely, yeah. Listen, your new book, Endgame, of course, the last in the William Warwick series. Have you another book in you?
I have. 6 years ago, I came across an idea that I think is bigger than Cain and Abel. I've spent the last 6 years thinking about it, and 3 years ago I wrote a 100-page outline, and my publishers offered me a ship to be pushed out to sea and do it until I got back. I think it's the most exciting thing I've ever done. I've now finished 10 drafts, so I'm halfway through, and I've never been more excited about a book in my life.
The brand new book is called Endgame. We'll talk about the next one when it's out. Jeffrey Archer, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey.